Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to Robert's Sports Show. I'm your host, Robert. Alright, NCAA College Football Week Dos. First week, I think we did alright. We did 47-7 in win-loss, 20-24 against the spread. Not great with that. Over-under 24-20. Hopefully we'll bounce back here in week 2. We got 35 games. Some notes from week 1. The most points scored was from the Maryland Terrapins, 79. We had 4 teams that didn't score any points at all. Liberty, Howard, Weber State, and South Florida. The big old goose egg. So we're going to start here. The first game we have the William and Mary that were 1-0. They won 30-17 last week versus the Virginia Cavaliers, who are also 1-0. They won 30-14. Virginia is favored by 13.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 45.5. Next up, we have the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. They won 38-35 last week versus the 0-1 Rice Owls, who lost 14-7. Wake Forest is favored by 17.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 55.5. Next up, we have the 1-0 Marshall Thundering Herd versus the 1-0 Boise State Broncos. Boise State is favored by 10.5. Probably going to be wrong with this, but I'm going on a limb. You know me and my limb picks. I am taking the Marshall Thundering Herd, giving them the 10.5. I think Boise State will cover that and over on the 56. Next up, we have the Sacramento State Hornets at 1-0 versus the Arizona State Sun Devils, who are also 1-0. Arizona State is favored by 35. I got them winning, covering, and under on 63.5. Next up, we have the Ohio Bobcats, who are 1-0, versus the Pittsburgh Panthers, who are 0-1. Pittsburgh is favored by 5.5. I'm giving the 5.5 to Ohio. Ohio has them winning, covering, and over on the 52.5. Next up, we have the Old Dominion Monarchs, who are 1-0, versus the 0-1 Virginia Tech Hokies. Hokies are favored by 28.5. I have the Hokies winning. I have the Monarchs covering the 28.5 and over on the 57. Next up, I have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, who are 1-0 versus the Iowa Hawkeyes, who are also 1-0. Iowa's favored by almost 3 touchdowns at home. I got them winning, covering, and I'm taking under on the 50.5. Southern University Jaguars versus who are 0-1 versus the 1-0 Memphis Tigers. Tigers favored by 37.5 at home. I got them winning, covering, and taking under on the 68.5. West Virginia Mountaineers 1-0 versus the 0-1 Mizzou Tigers. Missouri is favored by 2 touchdowns after losing by 6 points to Wyoming last week. I don't know which Missouri team we're going to get. The one that should show up? The one that can probably will off seven straight? Or are we going to get the one that played last week? I'm hoping we don't get the one from last week, so I'm taking the Missouri Tigers to win. I have West Virginia covering those 2 touchdowns at 14, so covering that and over on the 62.5. Next up, we have the Vanderbilt Commodores at 0-1 versus the 0-1 Purdue Boilermakers. Someone's got to get the first win this week. Purdue is favored by 7.5. I got Vandy covering that, so I think that'll be 6-7 point difference. And then taking over on the 55.5. Next up, we have the 1-0 Syracuse Orange versus the 1-0 Maryland Terrapins. Maryland is favored by 1.5. I have Terrapins winning. This is going to sound weird at 1.5. I got Syracuse covering and over on the 56.5. So it's going to be just a 1-point game. So that's how I feel. I could be wrong, but you know what? That's what I'm going with. Go with your gut. Next up, we have the Army Black Knights at 1-0 versus the 1-0 Michigan Wolverines. Michigan favored 22.5. I got the Black Knights covering that, and Michigan winning and over on the 46.5. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bearcats 1-0 versus 1-0 Ohio State Buckeyes. Buckeyes are favored by 16.5. I have them winning, covering. So I have Buckeyes winning. I have Cincinnati covering at 16.5, and I'm taking over on the 56. Next up, the Northern Illinois Huskies at 1-0 versus the 1-0 Utah Utes. The Utes is favored by 22. I am taking the Huskies to cover the 22 and then over on the 43.5. Next up, we have the 0-1 South Florida Bulls versus the 0-1 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Once again, someone's got to win. Both these teams actually got whitewashed last week. The Yellow Jackets lost 52-14 to Clemson, while the Bulls lost 49-0 to the Badgers. So we'll see what kind of game this is. 14-0 kind of game we're looking at, I guess. Georgia Tech is favored by 6. I have them winning. I have them covering. I'm taking under on the 61.5. Next up, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers versus the Colorado Buffaloes. My brain just stopped. Colorado is the dog at home. Nebraska is favored by 4. So I'm actually giving a 4 to Colorado, taking the home team here. Then winning, they cover the 4 and under on the 64.5. Next up, we have the Central Michigan Chippewas at 1-0 versus the Wisconsin Badgers, who have yet to give up any points on defense this year. They're favored by 35. I got them winning, covering, and we're going to do under on the 52. Next up, we have the Texas A&M Aggies 1-0 versus the 1-0 Clemson Tigers. Tigers are favored by 17.5. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 64.5. Next, we have the New Mexico State Aggies going into Tuscaloosa versus the Alabama Crimson Tide, who are 1-0. They blew out Duke 42-3 last week, while New Mexico got blown out by Washington State 58-7. Alabama is favored by 55.5 at home. Obviously, I have Alabama winning. I think New Mexico State can cover the 55.5. I don't think it's going to be it might be a 50-point blowout, but they're not winning by 55. So I'm in Mexico State covering the 55.5. And just for shits and grins, I'm taking over on the 64.5. Next up, we got the Murray State Racers at 1-0 versus the Georgia Bulldogs 1-0. Bulldogs favored by 48.5. I do have them covering at 48.5. Taking under on the 65.5. 61.5, excuse me. Next up, we have North Colorado Bears 0-1 versus the 1-0 Washington State Cougars. Cougars are favored by 36.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 63. Next up, we have the South Dakota Coyotes at 0-1 versus the Oklahoma Sooners at 1-0. Sooners win. I have the Coyotes covering at 36.5 and under on the 75.5. With the UCF Knights 1-0 versus Fort Atlantic 0-1. UCF favored by 10.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 67. LSU Tigers 1-0 versus the Texas Longhorns, who are also 1-0. LSU is favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 56. Next up, we have the Nevada Wolfpack 1-0 versus the 0-1 Oregon Ducks. The Ducks are favored by 24 at home. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 61. Tulane Green Wave 1-0 versus the Auburn Tigers 1-0. Auburn favored by 17.5. Winning, covering, and over on the 51.5. UT Martin Skyhawks 1-0 versus 1-0 Florida Gators. The Gators are favored by 44.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 59. Next up, we have the Western Michigan Broncos at 1-0 versus the Michigan State Spartans, who are also 1-0. Michigan State favored by 16.5. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 46.5. Buffalo Bulls 1-0 versus the Penn State Nittany Lions 1-0. Penn State favored by 29.5. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 56. Next up, the Golden Bears 1-0 versus the Washington Huskies 1-0. Huskies are favored by 13.5. I have the Bears covering 13.5. Taking over on the 44. Next up, Stanford Cardinal versus the USC Trojans, 1-0. Battle of the Pac-12. Same as the previous game, Colorado, Washington, also Battle of the Pac-12. USC is favored at home by 1. I'm giving the 1 to Stanford. I got Stanford winning, covering, and over on the 45. Next up, we have the Miami Hurricanes at 0-1 versus North Carolina Tar Heels at 1-0. Miami favored by 4. I got them winning, covering, and over on the 47.5. Next up, we have the Minnesota Golden Gophers at 1-0 versus the 0-1 Fresno Bulldogs. Gophers are favored by 3. I got them covering, winning, covering, and over on the 47. Oregon State Beavers 0-1 versus the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors 1-0. Hawaii favored by 6.5 at home. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 78.5. And last but not least, we have the Arkansas Razorbacks 1-0 versus the Ole Miss Running Rebels at 0-1. Ole Miss favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 50.5. That is going to be week 2 of the NCAA college football season. Make sure you check out NFL week 1. Make sure you check out CFL week 13. All here on Robert Sports Show. As always, thanks for watching Robert Sports Show, and don't just have a great day. Have a spiffy day. Robert Sports Show, your YouTube leader in sports channel content.